Welcome to Cockpit Conversations. This is a place where we share tips and strategies for not only getting hired, but getting the most out of your aviation career along the way. Additionally, we'd like to share thoughts on many things that we find interesting at 35,000 feet. Sit back, get comfortable, and welcome aboard.
All right. Hey, welcome to the podcast. Today's subject is, so you got the job. How do you not screw up in training? And I've got a couple of experts, a panel of experts, if you will, to help us figure that out. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So starting in my top left, AJ Pope, if you'd introduce yourself and kind of a little about your background and how long you've been an instructor.
Welcome, everybody. Aaron and I did OV-10s together, F-15s about the same time, and then got picked up by a major airline in Atlanta and have been here 27 years. Been in the schoolhouse more than not all the time there. I've been probably 20 out of 27 years in the schoolhouse or standards, line checking on the 88, but mostly teaching on the Boeing 75, 76, 76, 400.
Okay. And you're at APD now, correct?
Yeah. Correct. That's probably 90% of my work is maneuvers, valves, rating rides, day 2 recurrence.
Yeah. Okay. So we got one with 27 years experience. We're going to go to the opposite end of the experience spectrum. Alex Talley, tell us about yourself and how you got to this point.
Hello. Yeah, I'm an instructor for a major airline as well. I've been instructing for about a year and a half now, so just starting to get settled in the job. I started off my career, I went to the University of North Dakota, majored in commercial aviation there. I was a CFI at UND for the year after I graduated. I was part of the aerobatic team there, competing against other colleges. After UND, I went to SkyWest. I flew the CRJ and the ERJ there. I was captain on the CRJ for about a year. I did a short stint on the 737 at a different airline, and then on the current airline, I fly the 75 and 76 aircraft.
Okay, and you're Denver based for instructing, and you were at Alaska prior, for those that are curious. All right, kind of in the middle, Luke Jacobs, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Hey, thanks, Aaron. Luke Jacobs, retired Marine Harrier pilot. I was an instructor on the Harrier for about 7 years on and off in the fleet. Now I retired right as COVID hit. I did a year with Southern Airlines during the merger with Atlas on the 777, and then moved to my current company here in Denver. Been with the company just about 4 years and been an instructor for 3 of that on the 737. Really enjoy the job. I find it really rewarding to help, my peers, as I see them, both civilian and military, understand the complexities of the 737 and help them move through training.
Okay, fantastic. And then finally, rounding out our panel, Wilson McManus. Why don't you tell us about your background?
Hey, Aaron, thanks for having me tonight, and welcome everyone. I'm the token Navy Helo guy here. I started out flying where America's Day begins, out in Guam, search and rescue out there. Then I switched back to fixed wing, wound up doing some stuff with the Metro liner and also the Navy 737 flying logistics before I came to United in the fall of 2021. Flew the line on the 737 out of LAX and then moved to Denver in 2022, stayed on the 730 and then came into the building kind of in the fall of 2022, teaching here at our major airline in Colorado. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a great experience, and it's been awesome to be a part of getting to shape the future of United and be part of the standardization team.
Okay, fantastic. Part of the reason that I've asked this panel to be here is the gamut of experience. AJ, like me, has largely a pointy-nosed background. Luke, also a fighter-type aircraft, although one that took off and landed vertically with a whole new set of challenges. We've got Wilson with Helo experience, and then Alex with not one but 2 major training sessions under his belt at Alaska Airlines and then where he is now, as well as multiple type ratings and experience at the regional airline. So I think we've got about everybody covered. We may not have any business jet background guys, but Wilson's done some similar flying, so I think we could say we've got that covered. So I'll open it up kind of the floor. When we talk about showing up for initial training, every one of us brought something different to the table. Are there some universal things that you might want to tell somebody coming in with a background similar to yours, how they could best prepare for that initial airline training wherever they've been hired. And that includes, regionals or at a legacy. And I'll start with AJ. You've been doing this the longest. What nuggets do you have to pass on? It's day one. What do I need to do in the right frame of mind to show up and be successful?
Yeah, just like you said, be in the right frame of mind. Have your personal life all squared away back home and not any drama going on there. And if you do have something going on, delay training. Just tell whoever needs to, the training office, hey, we need to postpone. It's not a problem. It's just moving magnets and they'll put somebody else in your spot. Most of the training failures I've seen have been due to something going on at home. Illness, financial, whatever. Other than that,
but won't that affect my seniority if I don't take this first class, right? We hear that. So what would you say to somebody who's afraid of, everybody says my line number is the most important thing?
It is. You can start in doc. That gets your line number. And when the sim time comes 3 weeks later, you can always pull out and say, hey, I'm not ready yet.
Okay. So go to NDoc and then do that.
Yeah.
Would it be worth taking a later class if you had a major personal thing going on? Does anybody know anybody who's done that?
I do. I actually had a friend of mine about a year and a half ago, about a week prior, was not able to make it to training because his kid got really sick. And he called me up and asked me what to do. Do I show up? And I said, look, if you don't have this all in one bag, United might initially let you kick the can down the road a week or two, but you're probationary pilot, and that seniority number doesn't mean much if you're let go, right? So
that's
you got to be prepared.
Charlie Venema used to be the hiring official for United, and while he was there, he put in the 100-hour requirement within the last 12 months. And that was a major roadblock for some pilots because they were close and it just seemed so arbitrary. And it sounds kind of cold, but his rationale was actually very valid, which was if you go in as a probationary pilot and you struggle in training, I have limited resources per contract that I can provide to you. And if you are eliminated from training, the problem is now you leave Delta and you go up to America and they go, why are you here? Well, I washed out of training 3 months ago at Delta. It's a hard sell. So it sounds arbitrary or capricious, but it's actually to protect you. And I think that comes down to each pilot needs to make their own assessment, right? Where am I? Am I mentally prepared to go in here? Can I give this my full attention? If you can't, I think being honest with the recruitment staff and saying, hey, I've got a little issue that I've got working right now at home. Is it possible to delay this class until the next one if required? We all want that line number. We want to get in. We've been told for years, how important seniority is. But seniority only matters if you keep the job. All right. Let's talk some more about that initial training for a minute. What backgrounds, if any, have you seen that typically have problems? Are there particular groups or subsets of pilots that you find struggle more than others? Or do you see common threads in people who might need a little extra attention in the initial training, that first initial airline hiring? And if so, what advice would you have, or what could these pilots possibly do to prepare a little more, if anything, before they show up for training?
I'll say where I see common struggles are people who have not been actively flying recently. So someone who's maybe taken a break, they've been in the military as a pilot, but then they had a office job more recently, or for whatever reason, a break from a past airline. And flying is just something that you can lose that proficiency if you haven't been actively flying recently. So someone who hasn't been in the cockpit in a few years, when they show up for training, I just see that they're a little bit overwhelmed, and those are the ones that consistently struggle. So to those that haven't been flying recently, I would recommend try your best to go find an airplane, even if it's a small GA plane, to get your flying skills honed in. That way, when you show up, you're ready to study and have a little bit more brain power to think while you're in the simulator.
Okay. Crunchy's important. Anybody got anything else?
Yeah, one of the things I see a lot of, kind of in the middle of the syllabus, is usually where it displays itself, is folks that are trying to transition or make a big leap from the Airbus back to the Boeing product or vice versa. The Airbus guys in particular trying to make that jump over to the Boeing. A little bit different box setup in terms of, the way the French have designed it, and the way the points are doing, to from versus from to, whatever it is. So a lot of times they have some struggles, not only with that, but also with the actual aircraft handling characteristics, flying some of the single engine stuff around the maneuvers valve, kind of in the middle of the syllabus. That's usually where we see some of the flags for that.
I'll be direct with this. Is this like when you see somebody coming from, say, a JetBlue or a Spirit over to one of the legacies? Is that where you're finding this? They've got years.
Exactly. Yeah, like a Spirit, a JetBlue, a Frontier, and then they come into United, and for whatever reason they get bid into the 737. They don't either have any options, or they don't try to make something else happen. Usually, if you want to be on the Airbus or you want to be on the 737, it's pretty easy to get into one of those two fleets fairly right out of basic NDOC. You may not get it on your first day if you're a super, young junior guy. Good on you. But we do typically have vacancy bids that happen on almost a monthly basis, and those folks can actually get into training a little bit and then wind up trading into the syllabus that they're more familiar and comfortable with. And that usually is a great benefit to them. The other thing I'll say too is trying to go narrow body right off the bat is usually a huge benefit here, because you wind up learning the network and learning the system much, much better. Not to say that, the 777 or the 787 aren't amazing fleets, but you're going to see some of the crown jewels of the system, but not necessarily learn all the ins and outs of some of the hubs and some of the other places that you would go to on the narrow body fleets. So,
and you're going to see the simulator when you come back for your landing currency.
That's it.
Right.
That's exactly it.
AJ brings up a good point, and I am not an instructor in my airline, but where I work, we've hired people directly into the 777. And personally, like you did, I got started in the backseat of the 727. That's how old I am. But I got to sit there for a couple of years looking sideways, watching other people do this and kind of learning the lingo, learning to bid, learning to be an airline pilot. Granted, what I did have to learn was very new. It had its own challenges, but it was certainly manageable. I have said this to many of my contemporaries, the guys coming out of a completely different world, military aviation, single-seat fighters, and going straight to something like the 777. I would have really struggled, not just because of exotic airports or the international. I think that's somewhat procedural and you can get the reps. But I think there was a benefit for me of just flying a different kind of airplane around, banging it through multiple cycles early in my career that, if you will, rinsed off what I used to do and trained me to do something new. And you may have the opportunity at your particular airline, and I'm cautious to tell you not to go for the airplane you want or take the most lucrative seat you can, but you might give some strong consideration, if you have an opportunity like that, to the downside risks, which is this is going to be not only maybe not necessarily more difficult airplane to fly, but you're not going to have the repetitions that you would have in a narrow body aircraft. There's another factor, and I'll kind of defer to you guys, but all of you train new hires with some frequency, right? We've hired directly into the 7.5 at the Denver-based company. Atlanta has hired new hires into the 7.6. So that's fantastic. If you go to the triple, if you were to go to a place where you can go right to that, how often are those instructors used to seeing somebody with such a low baseline, right? We'd like to think that everything's objective, everything is measured, everything is fair. But if I'm used to flying with guys with 10,000 hours of transport, and I'm watching you suffer through your first V1 cut in a 777, it might be, you might have a little bit of instructor bias going, man, this guy's terrible. Well, he's not really terrible for where he is baseline. It's just they haven't had the cycles. So you can't always control what's available, but maybe depending on your experience. If you've been at JetBlue, if you've been at a regional for 8,000 hours, do I think you could go straight to the triple and probably be successful? Sure. And there have been people that have gone from backgrounds like mine straight to the big airplanes and been successful. But I do think they probably have to work a little harder. And as AJ pointed out, currency and getting the reps is important. And it's harder on the airplanes that are doing the international flying to get the landing cycles, to keep the landing currency. So you are going to spend more time in the simulator.
So, Aaron, I did that. When I went to Southern, I actually was in the worst case scenario. I was not current. I was out of the jet for about 2 years. I had a desk job as a retired. Then I got the COVID 777, and I will tell you, as a matter of fact, it is way more complicated to learn a big airplane as a new hire with no experience, because it is a different type of flying. It's really not even flying. I used to call it babysitting the jet, right? 98% of the time, you're not doing much. And the company I was at, I only touched the jet really once a month. So knowing my flows, knowing the callouts. Most of the time, I was sleeping in the bunk and then on legs between Korea and Cincinnati, babysitting the jet for 8 hours.
Well, I don't mean to cut you off. That's a very good point, because I know some of the people listening to this are going to have the opportunity to go to an ATI, to go to an Atlas, to go to a Coletta. Some of them may be coming out of a background like you. Somebody like Alex that's been doing multiple reps in an RJ would probably have a little bit of advantage, but even then, you're going from an airplane that probably weighed as much as that airplane carried in one fuel tank. So it is a different exercise, isn't it?
It is. It is, and the preparation for it was so different. So different. So I mentor guys and say, if that's what you want to do, there's some real risks. You need to do the risk, cost benefit analysis on it.
Well, let's take the positive side of that. They say, okay, thank you for that. I want to fly the Whale, damn it. It's been my dream. I've got this Atlas class. I'm going to go fly the 7400. Tell me how you would tell an ex-military pointy guy like us to get in the right place to go be successful at that training.
Well, so I think it boils down to preparation. You're not going to retain the information. Military training is reps. If you look back at our training, it's, you do 4 landings every flight. You do multiple touch and goes. You do multiple everything, right? By the time you get through training with the company that I was with, we did all the reps, but it's within 30 days. And then we got about 2 weeks off. And if you're not sitting in the chair like you're back as a second lieutenant in primary, talking to yourself with your kids looking at you, is dad going crazy? You're not going to be successful. Because by the time you touch that jet, they expect you to have nearly a systematic expert understanding of ETOPS, which, as a Harrier guy, I flew behind a tanker. They dealt with that problem. Listening to the Germans on the radio and the French on the radio and the Brazilians on the radio and Hong Kong, the stuff that we consider minutia as fighter guys is not minutia. It is the main course. And if you're not prepping yourself for that, you are going to absolutely struggle. I have friends that went to Big Purple and flying the DC-10, and they said, without a doubt, without chair flying every trip, they would have not been as successful as they were. So understanding that you've got to go back to your roots, which is what made you a fighter guy to begin with, is your prep time, and understanding how to use that successfully.
Okay, we'll talk about that, because I think I use some of those techniques even now going to recurrent. We'll get into the subject of recurrent in just a minute. Alex, you made a pretty big leap. You went from an CRJ, probably the biggest of the 900, over to 7576. How challenging did you find that? And what would you tell your contemporaries coming out of RJs and ERJs as the biggest difference, if any, as they move into, say, a mid-sized Boeing?
It definitely was a challenge moving up to such a bigger aircraft. And kind of piggyback off the last topic, I did have the option to go to an even bigger airplane, the 787, as a new hire. And my dad has recently retired on the 78 as well, same airline. And so I thought maybe that would be a great option for me, so I could have the opportunity to fly with him. And just talking about currency and actually being in the flying seat, his advice to me was to not take that position. He said, being new at the airline, you should make sure you're on an airplane that you're actually in the flying seat and you're getting lots of reps in. you're the one flying it. And I'm really glad I did. I chose the 757 and only 2 pilots for the domestic legs, and I got to get a lot of repetition, a lot of landings that first year there, and that was crucial to learning the airplane. Whereas if I was typically a bunkie pilot, I wouldn't get a landing in very often, and after a couple of years at the airline, I probably still wouldn't be very proficient. So as far as learning the new airplane, it is a challenge. I would say go and pick up trips on reserve, fly as much as you can, be in the seat as much as you can, click the autopilot off, tell the captain you're trying to get better at hand flying. And it's really just time and seat and practice to get better in the airplane.
Okay.
And for those guys that don't understand the operation yet, on a 3-man aircraft, usually the boss is going to take it to first destination, and the next senior FO is going to fly it home. So if you're junior, you're going to pilot monitor in the right seat on the way over and your relief boy on the way back, and you're going to the sim every 90 days.
Mm-hmm. So it's hard to really get that muscle memory of what the airplane really feels like. It might be exotic to say, yeah, I had a 72-hour layover in Narita or Paris, but if you're having to go to the sim, especially at a fragile early point in your career, maybe that's not a good strategy. I think we're jumping ahead, and I like this. We've leaked ahead a little to, okay, on the line, which airplane to pick and how to manage your approach to getting out there and getting the reps. But what about when you're just showing up, going in the box for your first maneuver valve in the A320 or the 737 or the 76? What are some things that you have found that help people new to the airline, maybe new to this particular airframe, maybe new to transport category airplanes, get their hands around what they're getting into and ultimately be successful and able to fly these maneuvers?
Well, I think the first thing is for, again, military guys, and honestly, even civilian guys, peers that showed up with me from Kalita and Atlas, is understanding that the legacies, it's a quick timeline. This is going BI, maybe 3-4 days off, and then right into the sims, right into systems training. So you've got to know in order flows, call outs, limitations, and your non-normals, period. End of story, period. You've got to dedicate your off time to that. The successful students that I see, particularly in procedures, are the guys that understand how to prioritize that. They may not have all your CBTs done yet, but they know the procedures, they know the call-outs, they know the flows. I can teach them something. If I'm having to spoon feed them the call-outs, they're missing a whole section of the training, which is why line guys are doing the training at our airline. So that, I think that's the big piece. The second piece is just understanding that you don't know what's going on. If you're coming from SkyWest, that's a different operation than a legacy airline, and particularly military guys that are very fortunate to make the jump into legacies right off the bat. It's a totally different type of flying. The expectations are different. We cannot do 500 knots into the break. The 250 rule at 10,000 feet is important. And a lot of the details that, quite frankly, the stuff that I didn't really care about 20 years ago are the things I care about now. And understanding that and being willing to acknowledge that this is different. Not all flying is the same.
Okay. One of the things I'll offer maybe a positive sliver of hope here a little bit, at least at our airline based in Colorado here, you wind up seeing in our maneuvers valve is on full flight 5. So you wind up seeing the same event essentially twice on 3 and 4 before you wind up actually going and being tested on it in 5. So the good news is you can get an idea, while you're back at the hotel, studying with your study partner or your captain upgrade. Hey, here's the stuff we need to do to kind of chair fly through this and get a little bit of the muscle memory built into your head. The other thing, too, that I see a lot of successful crews, too, is actually take notes during the brief and listen during the brief. Because you'll have a gamut of different instructors that'll throw out some different techniques. You go in there, and at least on full flight 3 and 4, and try and see some of those techniques and see what works for you. And a lot of times, some of the more seasoned instructors will have some really good ones to help you out. So if you're taking good notes, you're paying attention before you actually get into the box, you're gonna have some good success there, and then have the opportunity to see this thing a couple times before you actually go get tested on it.
That's a good point when you come to techniques. One of the things that I learned in my various airline upgrades and plane changes over the years was I could fly with 3 or 4 different instructors, but each would sometimes reference something different they used to set parameters. For instance, some guys were big on fuel flow. Like, hey, on a V1 cut, I like for about this fuel flow on the good engine when I'm, on a downwind. Some guys were N1 or N2. It was interesting to see what people gleaned, and maybe that's one tip we could give new people is, hey, where are you looking when? What information is important to you in this particular phase of flight? I know for V1 cuts, losing an engine, I'm 95% outside initially. I'm looking off the end of the runway, right? I don't even really always know which engine just failed. I just know I have this subconscious thing that wants to keep the nose straight, and I do that. I straighten the nose, and then I kind of figure out, okay, which leg's dead? Now I glance at the engine gauges. Now I actually start to let the front part of my brain figure out which engine just failed, and then I think about the call-outs. But I don't know who taught me that years ago, but if your eyes are outside in certain phases, it makes more sense. And then more importantly, okay, if I want a snapshot, where am I looking for a piece of particular information? And, when we're talking about RNP approaches or things, what's the important part of this cross-check now? So learning or asking the instructors, what do you look at a particular phase is something that I took as somewhat valuable. Alex, you came from from a regional to a legacy airline to another legacy airline. Probably different call-outs, different procedures, slightly different procedures at each place. What did you find that helped you where you are now? How do you keep the good stuff and rinse the other stuff off? What was your approach? And what would you tell a student coming from, say, a guy going from Alaska Airlines to Delta, or from JetBlue? He's flown the A320, he gets to United, he's lucky enough to get an A320 there. But we're going to a different airline. What's your advice?
Well, definitely, like Luke mentioned, number one, you have to show up to the lesson with call-outs, memory items nailed. If you're learning that during the brief, the instructor asks you to go through the V1 cut profile and you're stumbling through it while you're sitting in a chair in a brief room, there's almost no point on going in the sim that day because you're not ready for it. So make sure you have the call-outs down. Different techniques to make sure you have it down. If you read it in front of you, turn your iPad screen off or flip the page over and then, say it out loud to yourself. That's maybe not the best method to really retain the information. I would say different techniques, but chair fly with a sim partner, do something physical with your hands, throw a ball back and forth, do something. So that way the callouts are automatic. So when you are in the sim and you have that V1 cut, and just like you mentioned, Darren, going down the runway, you're focusing on your feet, on your rudder, keeping the nose straight, doing a good rotation. And that way, 95% of your brain power can be on flying the airplane, and only 5% is used on actually saying the call outs and flying the correct profile. As far as switching airlines, I would say in high stress situations, I found myself always reverting back to those old call outs. I'd brief it perfectly fine with the new airline, and then when I'm task saturated, I would revert back to that old call out every once in a while. And I see it in the sim today while I teach new hires, or someone new in this airplane, they'll say an Airbus call out or something. So really just practice repetition, making sure the call outs are very easy to say.
That's fine. And a misspeak or an old procedure is just a debrief item. But if you show up or in the box and you're saying, this is how we did it at brand X, I don't want to hear it. We don't have time for that. You got to get rid of it.
Totally agree. I actually have no patience for that. You're here on a date with me. I need you to know my stuff.
Well, I actually appreciated that, because when I had experienced that was when I went to the MD-11 and my training partner had come from the Airbus. And whenever the instructor would go into a detailed point, he would then say, well, on the bus, we did it like this. And that gave me about 120 seconds to check into my own private Idaho or whatever, as he babbled, and I could see the smoke coming out of the instructor's ears. And it was also a reminder of, hey, I'm not the one that this instructor is going to have a beef with. It's going to be this guy.
Right.
So it was kind of humorous to me. But no, I agree with that. Nobody cares what you used to do. What matters is we've got 7 or 8 boxes. We want to get you to a certain proficiency level. Before I start diving into maybe a little more nitty gritty about the psychology of training and what you see people struggling with and the techniques that you found to help them, for people who haven't done a 121 AQP course, one of the things that I found anecdotally talking to former clients that have been hired that was their big stress was they would say to me often, I just don't feel ready. I just don't feel ready. And when you look back, and I think Luke alluded to this, when I used to train people in the F-15, we would go up and we'd do 3 rides and then a solo ride. And on that solo ride, they had done everything that they had done on the first 3 rides. There was nothing really new, okay? Then we had to get them an instrument check. Before they ever did an instrument check with an evaluator pilot, there was a practice instrument ride. I-1 it was called, instrument 1. And I ended up doing a lot of those. And it was almost exactly what they were going to do on a check ride. And as I look back at my military history, it was always like you got to a plateau. Somebody told you before you were evaluated, hey, that was good. Now show the evaluator the next day what you just did. Airlines realized a long time ago, we're wasting a step, right? If you're going to be okay by box number 9, why am I making you do box 8 and then 9 and then another 9? Why don't we just put it all together? And what I found when I got to my airline was I always felt like a fledgling bird being pushed just a little faster than I wanted to go. And I had my standards of what I thought were good performance from my previous job. And I'd come out of a box for a debrief going, man, I stunk today. And the instructor would say, that was a pretty good Sim 3 or a pretty good Sim 4. And I'd go, yeah, but I sucked. And he'd go, yeah, but you'll be better tomorrow. And that extended up to the ride before, the check ride, the Chloe or whatever for the initial. Not talking about recurrent, not talking about upgrade, but that initial. It's like, are you telling me that I'm good enough to be evaluated tomorrow? Yes, I am. So I didn't feel like I was all ace of the base. And you're so used to, especially if you've been in another genre for a while, you've been a 4-ship flight leader, instructor pilot, or an aircraft commander in a previous airplane, you're used to being pretty good at something. And this is the first time you're just kind of hanging on to the tail, flailing along. And that alone is a big psychological jump for guys. We're so used to being absolutely rock solid that when we're struggling just to meet the men there, because we haven't got a lot of reps, it's extremely uncomfortable. And what I have learned, again, not as an instructor, so I'm interested to hear your perspective, but I would tell guys, trust the training. Trust yourself. If that instructor tells you, hey, tomorrow it's going to come together, you completely blew up this RNP approach, your call-outs are stupid, the V1 cut was a little sloppy today, you know what to do to fix it, and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm flying with an evaluator tomorrow, but he says you're going to be fine, you know what happens? You typically are. And it's getting used to not being comfortable and maybe being pushed just a little faster, because in the airlines, time is money, right? In the Air Force, or the Marine Corps, proficiency was what we were training to. Well, we want to get that proficiency, but we'd like to do it in a very cost-effective manner. So understand you're not going to be great sometimes. You're not going to be as good as you've been in the past at what you were doing. But trust yourself to be good enough. I don't know if that helps anybody, but what do you guys have to add? What do you see people struggle with specifically? And whether it's a task or an approach to training, and what kind of advice or mentoring have you given them along the way to get them over those hurdles? And we'll keep this limited to the initial training.
I think one of the things I see all the time, particularly from C-130 crews and pilots with helo backgrounds, is jumping all over the rudder pedals. Nothing is more frustrating as an instructor pilot in the back of the sim getting tossed left and right during either an approach or upset training, which could be a really fun sim. The 7.3 has really bad Dutch roll tendencies, and it's the standard response. Well, in my previous aircraft, this is how we did it. I get it. I hear you. There's some stuff that in the Harrier I would do. Can't do it now. Got to stay off the rudder pedals. And so it's some of the, again, intricacies of what you used to do to what you're trying to do now, and then trusting instructors. I had a crew literally today that after every event, they're like, how are we doing? Like, hey man, this is B3. You're exactly where I need you to be. You're making no unsafe procedural errors. You're missing some stuff, but you're catching some stuff. You're right where we think you need to be, but you need to use your time on your off time to sit in front of the paper dragon, to say the calls, to do the immediate actions, to do the procedures. That's what our company will need you to do is that prep time between the events. You need to use it effectively. Just like Tom Brady was talking about before the Super Bowl, if you saw that, was every minute before the Super Bowl was an opportunity to be more prepared than the other team. That is what we depend on our students to be, is the most prepared student for every event.
Okay. So talk me through a good preparation. If you're going to go for a B3, an initial, maybe a ride before the first maneuvers validation, what blocking and tackling, what do they need to be doing?
Well, what I told my crew today was, if you know your flows inside and out, cold, and the best way to really know that, to test each other and to test yourself, is to do them out of order. Start backwards. Hey, I'm going to do my shutdown flows. I'm going to do my after landing flows. I'm going to do my pre-flight flow. If you know how to do them out of order, you know how to do them in order. The next thing is the call outs, just like Alex said. If you're not doing them when you're doing push-ups or running or throwing a ball against the wall, hopefully not in your hotel room and ticking off your neighbors. But if you don't know those call outs, you will not know them during the go around when the stress level is high and we're on brainstem power. You've got to be able to do them cold with your eyes closed, doing something else other than focusing on the words. And then finally, it's just a little bit of confidence, knowing that you've put the time in. You cannot do well in this training program if you're only studying for 45 minutes a day. You're just not going to do it. You really need to put in 2 to 4 hours, depending on the age of your brain and your study tactics. But if you know what you need to do to study, like, I'm a note card guy. I write everything on note cards, and I also talk to myself. Wilson will tell you this. He hears me talking to myself all the time like a crazy person. I talk to myself constantly. That's how I study. But you've got to lean on your tools that made you successful in the first place.
Okay. AJ, what have you got to add?
Along with the studying, be ready to study. Be nutritionally squared away. Get a little exercise in, whether it's walking, going, getting your pumpitude on, or whatever. But probably most important, especially for single seat guys, you cannot study alone. You got to study with somebody else. Probably 80% of training failures, I studied alone. Well, can't help you, dude.
Okay. Well, that brings up some questions, but I'm going to circle back to study partners, because I think that is a vital thing. But I'd like to hear from Wilson and Alex if they've got any other, blocking and tackling things for success.
One thing I'll add is most airlines I've been to, they give you the whole training footprint and a lot of the briefs, the PowerPoints ahead of time and the lesson ahead of time. And so the students I see who do the very best are in the brief, they already went through the slideshow, the PowerPoints, and they say, hey, I have a question on this slide and this slide. Can we talk about that? Then it's great. We can dive into that topic. And really the brief is then a refresher for them. It's the second time they've seen it and they do really well. So if you're able to study one lesson ahead, I see that's a huge help.
I totally agree with that slide deck thing. That's our Colorado-based company has all of your slides available throughout the entire syllabus that you can absolutely ping off of early. And I think that's fantastic to be able to come into the brief having seen it at least once, if not reviewed it a couple times already in your hotel room before you ever walk in the door to the training facility. The other thing I'll touch on too, just an overall big picture, is we build the syllabus on a building block approach. So it's a crawl, walk, run strategy where you're learning the systems of the aircraft. Now you're learning the normal procedures and the gate-to-gate normal operations. Where this breaks down sometimes is folks start to get into a different phase of training and maybe they forget or they regress on some of the previous stuff that they learned. So we'll see guys that'll come into the maneuvers phase. They'll really focus on learning to fly the jet, the monkey skills and the stick and rudder stuff. and then they'll come into the line-oriented training phase at the very end, and they will have forgotten some of those normal procedures that they needed to know to make everything work. So it all builds on each other, and once you get to the end, it's more of an application phase. So hey, when are you going to actually slow the jet down? How are you going to switch the modes here? How are you going to get the jet descended into, Seattle or wherever it is for its emergency landing that you're going to make? So yeah, keep in mind that everything is a building block approach that builds on each other, and it's not just stuff that you're going to use for one phase and be validated and be done. You've got to continue to use that, put that knowledge to work throughout your entire time in the syllabus.
I'll offer a couple of things looking back at my training, and I think overall my training always went well. And while I don't think anybody relishes time away from the family or anything, I can't say it wasn't a fun experience at times. But I think about study hygiene. What do I mean by that? You need to have a nice place to study. Now, I think at most major airlines right now, they're actually providing hotel rooms unless you live locally, which is a benefit. At my company, that's not the case. But I learned that spending enough on a nice crash pad, having a private bedroom, having a nice area where I could study, where I could wander into a kitchen, grab something to eat when I wanted, in a relaxing environment helped me. Like AJ said, showing up fit, showing up rested. I rode a bike a lot on some bike trails when I was going through my most rigorous training, MD-11 training, and then again when I went through my captain's upgrade training on the 7.6. And that really helped. The other thing that helped me was we've gone digital in a lot of places. Here's a cockpit mock-up on your iPad and things like that. I'm old school, having a printout, having overhead panels and cockpit mock-ups to sit there and practice my flows in my crash pad by myself was extremely important. I didn't have to worry about waking up 3 other roommates or getting mugged, if I had to get up to go in for a 2 a.m. box where I was staying because I chose to stay in a nice place. I think there is sometimes a mindset of I want to save as much money as I can, but I remind our clients out there that you're a major airline pilot now. And the money you invest in yourself to make sure you're comfortable and secure and able to execute here is going to set you up for success for the next 20 or 30 years. So this is not the time to go super cheap. This is a time to actually invest in yourself and make sure that you got an environment, a car that'll get you there safely, everything that you need to be successful. But one of you mentioned, hey, this is something for you single seat guys you need a partner for. And this brings up a very funny story because the same guy that loved to tell everybody about the Airbus when I was there, and that's not, going to necessarily help the training, but he wanted everybody to know what we used to do. This was my brief. Hey, so this is my first glass airplane, and I'm looking forward to working with you and all this. And the answer I got was, my place is on the other end of town, and I generally got a lot to do, and I don't like to study with people. Okay, well, we got that settled. He was 62 years old. He was coming back from the back seat of the 727, and he didn't give a shit about me personally, professionally, or otherwise. I was his sim partner. I was the umpteenth sim partner he had. As we worked together, we interfaced pretty well. We got through the training just fine. But what advice would you give somebody who has a sim partner that maybe has a different approach to training, doesn't want to study as hard, doesn't want to go out and memorize the call outs? Is this something they can work through, or is this something that you think they should approach training about and ask for another partner? What's some advice? And I'm sure you've had people who've struggled say, well, part of the problem is my partner. And we've also seen, the danger here too sometimes is you'll have a new hire person who's on probation and somebody who's in for a captain upgrade. And the stakes of failure are very, very different for the two of them, right? I mean, if that captain fails upgrade, he's going to go back to the right seat of a major legacy airline, and that can be a happy ever after life for some people. This person on probation could lose their job. So tell me how you would recommend or give me some examples or war stories about how to deal with partners that may not be the perfect mesh.
Well, I think the first part of that is that you need to stand up for yourself. Know your limits. I had a crew probably about a year ago, captain upgrade, jumping the trash bag from the right seat on the 7-3 to the left seat, the 7-3. Very strong personality, much like mine. The company that Wilson and I were with gives us a personality test. So it's nice to know your own personality, positives and negatives. And then the FO was really young, junior, inexperienced as well. And I could see the captain totally dominating the training. It was not a good sim really for either one of them. And so I sat him down. I said, hey, are you guys studying together? First question. They said, no. I live on the north side of town and I live on the south side of town. I was like, well, when do you guys meet up? Like, well, we don't. We meet about 20 minutes prior to the sim, and we might talk on the phone. I looked the FO in the eyes and I said, you're going to have to figure this out. The captain knows what he's doing. Just that's a fact of life. It's very disappointing that he's showing a lack of leadership in this, but you're going to have to figure this out. Luckily, most of these classes now, the new hire classes, create WhatsApp groups. I'm still part of my WhatsApp group from 4 years ago. You're all in the same hotel, right? So part of it is going to be on you. We're in the varsity league of flying here, so you're going to have to put the weight on your shoulder. The next part is then bring it up to an instructor, right? You can approach me or any other instructor, say, look, I'm not studying right. I need help. What techniques? I'll totally sit down for as long as it takes to tell you, how I learn. Understanding how you learn, I think, is really important. And then the final piece is you got to go to management. The company we're with here in Denver, we really do care about the new hires. I can tell you from personal experience, I struggled on OE. I had about a 30-plus day break. I didn't really put the time in, and I needed help. I called the company, and I said, I need a sim. I'm not ready to go hit the line. And they're like, roger that. Come back, get my sim in. I'm ready to hit the line. And then, I walked away from that. The company cares. They're investing thousands of dollars in you. But it's all about you. You've got to fight for yourself, and you've got to recognize that maybe the captain is taking away from your training or your partner's taking away from your training. Because if you don't say anything, you're going to end up a guy with AJ doing your line check. It's too late. It's way too late then to be like, well, I'm not studying right and I need help. The company's already invested 10 sims plus in you. You've got to make that call early and often. And the company I can speak at least from our company, we will go trip over ourselves to make sure that you are successful.
Okay. Well, I know your personality. My cat says hi to everybody. You're a 20-year Marine Harrier pilot. I could expect you to advocate for yourself. Alex is a soft-spoken, real gentleman. Maybe not quite as aggressive. I know he'll speak up for himself. I'm not disparaging him. But Alex, from your perspective, have you seen anything like that? Do you have other advice?
Really similar advice, to be honest, which is most classes do have that group chat. So go find the right study partners. And I will say, maybe you've found a group of people and you're just not studying the way you want to be. Maybe they're not the right group or not the right, people to be working with. So message other people, try to find someone else where it works well for you. But the other things I'll add, which is every instructor is very happy to help. You should have the instructor's phone number. At our company, it's pretty common practice to give our phone number out at the beginning of the lesson. And a couple of times I've had students I've worked with in the past text me asking for help. And I think every one of us is more than happy to give them a call and use all of our resources to help as much as we can. And then that includes adding an additional sim. Training is fast-paced. There's not much time to be wasted, but if needed, you can get an extra sim from the company because they do want you to be successful. So reach out to the instructors as well as your classmates.
It's probably a little bit of a gut check, though, to raise your hand and say, hey, my captain's blowing me off, or I'm really struggling. I could use an extra sim. How can I convince people that that's not going to put them in a bad light or get them in trouble?
I think ask the instructor, get their opinion, tell them what's going on. And if the instructor is the one requesting the extra sim for you, the company is happy to help. So trust the instructors, trust the company.
Okay. AJ, anything from the Atlanta side to add to that?
Yeah, just like Alex said, the company owns you till you're done with training. So if you get an extra sim or a procedures trainer, it's free training. Take it.
Yeah. I don't think there's any stigma, and we'd much rather do that early than late, like we said. Okay.
Thanks.
I was going to offer as well, Aaron. If you're a military guy in particular, find a study partner that offsets some of the knowledge that you don't necessarily have. I came into United knowing already how to fly the 737, have the type rating, but I'd never done any Part 121 style flying. And thankfully, I was paired with the SkyWest guy. So I was like, hey, why would I call ramp, or why do I need to talk to metering, or what is ACAR is actually going to give me? Some of the stuff that you're not used to initially doing that point-to-point airline-style transport flying, hey, find somebody that's going to be able to help you answer some of those really basic questions that you don't necessarily yet have the knowledge base into, specifically for the scenarios that you're going to get thrown into in each sim. So that helped me a lot, actually being paired, even though we were first officer with somebody who was had 121 experience already, whereas I did not.
That's all good stuff. I'll tell you, as a non-instructor, about my sim partners. Like you, Wilson, I would have loved to had somebody with previous 121 experience in my initial new hire class as a 727 second officer. But my class was all military. And who did I get paired with? I go, well, at least let me fly with a heavy guy. Nope, I got a Harrier guy. And, we laughed, always trying to figure out who was the stupider one and how we were going to get through this. But what we did do pretty well is we did pair up, we did study, and we tried to pull in our study group, intel from the other guys, and we sought resources. And you know what? Both of us passed and got out of line with zero problems, zero initial IOE problems. When I came back, my first transport category airplane, 727 right seat, I get paired with another right seater. And that's a nasty thing, because for either of us to get the best training, when we were in the left seat, we needed to be able to kind of be captainous with the call outs, with the flows, and do what we were expected. So I kind of felt like they took the two dumbest guys and then they doubled our workload. But that's the card I got dealt. And I can tell you, 2004, 2005, other airlines were furloughing. I was just glad to have a job. And it's kind of like being in the military out and on a remote or someplace crazy. You go, this seems really dumb, but everybody else is doing it. I guess this is normal. So you just get through it. Then when I finally get a captain for my first modern glass jet, he's the guy that I talk about. He's 62. He's coming back from 2 years on the panel and wants to tell everybody about the airplanes that he used to fly, has no time for me. And I found I did a lot of self-study. Now, we cracked the ice. We got to be friends. And like Luke said, I was strong enough to advocate for myself when I needed to. But I also realized that a lot of this training was going to be on me. But because I knew some MD-11 instructors that had the kind of spirit that you guys do, I leaned on them. I asked them for advice, reading materials, and things like that. And I got through the training again. No hits, no problems. And then finally, I went to the left seat. And I got a real FO, and that one was absolutely enjoyable. It was finally a great sim partner. We studied together. So I feel like I've had every combination along the way. But I will say that a good partner makes it so much more effective. So if you don't have one, speak up and listen to what these guys are telling you, because that's important.
Thank you for joining us today. This has been Cockpit Conversations with Aaron Hagen from Emerald Coast Interview Consulting. Have some ideas for future interesting episodes? Contact us at emeraldcoastinterviewconsulting.com with your ideas and inputs. We look forward to hearing from you.